Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the program Olayemi Olurin, political commentator and defense attorney, also proprietor of, I can't pronounce this,
Olurinati.
Like Illuminati, right?
Yeah,
Sam?
but like my last name.
Olurin, Illuminati.
Okay. Olurinati. Yes, YouTube channel and Substack. Welcome to the program, Olayemi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And y'all can call me Olay. Make your life easy.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
It's a huge relief for Sam.
It is a huge relief for me. I'm not good at pronouncing anything. Okay, so Olay, let's this week started off with an impeachment of Homeland Security Director Mayorkas. It's not going to go anywhere probably in the Senate, and it just happened by one vote. And it's really centered around all this immigration stuff. And I imagine in the context of what you're doing, you do more defense attorney work, but I would imagine immigration bumps up against this quite a bit in the context of the city. And it's also sort of like hand in hand with the Suozzi election, sort of has rekindled the thing that really hurt the elections in New York 2 years ago, was this sort of like hysteria around crime and this hysteria around migrants overrunning the city. I mean, it is fascinating to hear people talk about somehow like this. Immigrants are like have overrun New York City, and like what?
In a city full of immigrants.
Exactly.
Full of immigrants. It's so absurd. But that is the thing with New York City. And the unfortunate part is the propaganda isn't even coming from the right when it comes to what's happening in New York. It's coming from the Eric Adams. It's often coming from our own, like the people in charge. They're the ones that kind of push this rhetoric. Eric Adams is the one that has propelled this hysteria about crime. And he literally introduced us this migrant crisis. And all these things are very often distractions for other things that are actually happening, right? And the unfortunate part is when the truth comes out, like when they were doing this throughout the pandemic, 2020, 2021, saying there's this crime spike, saying, oh, all the places are being shoplifted. And then when all the national news outlets are forced to say, oh, it seems this was manufactured, this wasn't quite this retail hysteria and all of this crime, and crime is actually lower, nobody reports that. You could go right now and see on the comptroller's website, who's constantly putting out the actual facts on bail reform, on crime, on the migrant crisis, and dispelling that. But no one is interested in the facts, because what they're getting is from the Post and the internet and all this propaganda. It's the same way when you think about it, how Eric Adams just the other day was saying he got up there with NYPD about how the migrants are here committing crime. They used that case about the migrants beating up the NYPD officers. Only moments later for it to be revealed footage that the migrants were attacked by NYPD officers, which any defense attorney could have told you common sense wise. But just by the fact that in that case, the judge who actually said, first of all, it was bail eligible. It was a violent felony. So bail reform had nothing to do with it. You could set bail. And then the judge was a former prosecutor of 16 years who made an executive decision not to set bail that the prosecutors asked for, which told any attorney that whatever narrative is being presented to us by the media and the police is different than the facts that the court has. And then once we get the body cam footage that contradicts what Eric Adams and NYPD jumped out there to say, it's too late. The narrative is set, the Post and everywhere. No one walks it back. They don't walk it back because people like hysteria. That's what the media likes. That's what gets engagement online. And so they go with that. And the unfortunate part is it only ends up hurting the Dems in the end, because what Eric Adams and all of them do is people don't care. People care about whether they feel safe, not whether they are safe. And so if they're being told that they're in danger, they feel afraid. And then by the time election comes around, who's in office? Who gets hurt? The Democrats.
Well, not if your name is Eric Adams, right? I mean, that's the whole point, is that Eric Adams, if he says there is rampant crime in the city and we're being overrun by migrants, who are you going to turn to? Well, he's a former cop. And so he's basically he's creating a false premise so that he is the answer to this, he's the answer to the straw man here.
Which is what Trump's doing on the national stage, by the way. And the fact that Democrats copy and paste that strategy for their urban centers is just like a deeply depressing reality.
The only little bit of fairness I could give the amount of bail I could shoot New Yorkers on this one is Eric Adams we know what he is now, right? Everybody knows this is not Eric Adams is a wolf in sheep clothing. He's not a Democrat. He's not on the left. He's not even a centrist or a moderate. He actually thinks the liberals and the moderates are crazy. That's literally what he thinks. He's very much so on the right, but in fairness to everybody else, he didn't present that in the primaries when he was against all the Maya Wileys and everybody. That's when he was all in the ads pretending to be a civil rights activist. So he showed something different to New Yorkers. So what they thought they were going to get, whether misguided or not, they thought they were going to get a black guy who gets it, who's experienced racism and has fought it from the inside, but also has some respect for law enforcement and is going to fight this crime and all this and the next thing. But what he's been doing since the beginning is creating these straw mans. That's what he did with bail reform. And I said this like 2 years ago. Will
you walk us through, like, because I think like most people hear the words bail reform, they don't know what it really means.
Yeah.
But it's used as this bludgeon, the idea that George Soros has control of all these prosecutors all across the country. Yeah. And they are, they're doing things like bail reform, and they're basically telling shoplifters, like, don't worry about it. And they're allowing violent criminal, like all of this is all part of that same hysteria. Meanwhile, we should know, like, violent crime. Well, crime, I think, in New York City is down almost 25%.
Yes.
That's nuts.
Yes. Like, and the majority of what's in the New York criminal system and the criminal system across the country isn't violent crime in the first place. It's not even felonies. It's misdemeanors, traffic offenses, and low violations and non-infractions. The majority of what you're seeing in the criminal system isn't that. I could tell you that. Practicing in New York City. The thing about everything, all the hysteria around bail reform and everything that happens in New York City has a lot to do with how New York City is perceived. And it's perceived as this big progressive utopia with a bunch of black people and brown people, and it's, it's minorities running amok. That's how they make it seem. Meanwhile, if you look at New York City got landmark bail reform at the top of 2020. But New Jersey got rid of cash bail in 2014 under Chris Christie, but you never heard about that, right? Like next door, that doesn't get talked about. You only get these dog whistles because New York City is painted like all of the wees are there. But what bail reform did in New York City, and bail reform has been incredibly successful. There are all the stats on this. I suggest people go to a website called factsnotfair.org, and they will give you all the stats on that. But also the comptroller has it all on his website. But bail reform was bail in and of itself is designed to make sure that people return to court. That's, first of all, I want to say that, because people have this idea from the media that it's a safety factor, that they're deciding that people are dangerous and that's why bail is being set. No, bail is set to determine whether people go to court. So what happened in bail reform is we made misdemeanors, not traffic offenses, and non-violent crime, and some low-level felonies became non-bail eligible on that first arrest. So now, instead of, if I called the police and I said Sam was calling me a bunch of times, well, no, that might be harassment. DV get something. But if I said my roommate cursed me out, and my roommate got arrested, now instead of being automatically subjected, they could ask for bail, and that would be non-bail eligible. If he has no criminal record, if he has no failures to appear, if there are no indications to the court that he won't return to court, if there's no violence or anything like that. Now, and I think this is an important part, because the media loves to say, all these people are getting out and they're committing crime again. That's not true. It's factually not true. If you got rearrested for anything, whether it was bail eligible or not the first time, if you get rearrested, the court can set bail and likely will set bail. So that is very much still the case. And the case of rearrests are negligible, the amount of rearrests. And again, they set bail, and that's not having to do with anything with violent crime.
And just to be clear, the like you say, the idea of bail is so that they return, so that if bail is too high to actually keep someone from leaving and returning, in other words, they can't afford bail, a good defense attorney says bail is too high there, because he can't possibly, my client can't possibly, meet that bail. It's beyond reasonable to assume that they're going to return. So bail was never about keeping somebody off the streets.
Right.
It was always, the judge has other, I mean, if the judge feels that like a potential, an accused is somehow dangerous, or there's enough evidence to suggest that like they might be a danger, the judge has other mechanisms in which to keep them off the street, right?
Exactly. And what's important is bail has never been a tool. Bail is not a tool for keeping us safer. That's not the factor that it's in court, right? Bail is used. How bail is used in the criminal system is to coerce pleas, because the reality is most things you represent in the most criminal cases in the legal system are not resolved as criminal cases. Most of them will be disposed of. Most of them will be dissolved with something less than a criminal conviction. What happens is, and I think this is important, especially in the context of, think about this in the context of homelessness, especially in New York City, because they're always thinking homeless people saying, oh, they have these long rap sheets or they're in and out of the criminal system. What happens is the court knows if you'll have a case, say I've had this case. I represented a homeless man who had a long rap sheet, and then he is accused of stealing like chapstick out of CVS or something. That's not a case they would ever be able to resolve as a criminal conviction, or we would go anywhere. We wouldn't waste time on this. This would get dissolved. But because they know he's homeless, he has no money, he has nowhere, he has no ability to post bail, and he's been turned in and out all these other times. What the court will say is, before, this is prior to bail reform, the court will say, okay, we'll offer you complete to the charge and we'll let you out now, or we'll set bail. And so if a person is faced with, even though this case would go nowhere, is I'm going to go to jail on something I wouldn't go to jail on. You would never be able to send him to jail if he on a conviction or anything but you could use pretrial and cash bail to get him in. So what happens is people will just plead to the charge so that they can leave then. And now they have criminal convictions and a rap sheet that's going to be weaponized against them at a later date.
So to emphasize the point as well, it's basically a leverage point for prosecutors to rack up basically conviction rates, which is helpful for them in their careers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, and what Eric Adams has done, his attack on bail reform was kind of born out of the campaign to close Rikers, right? Like, in order to close Rikers, the original plan that de Blasio had signed on to was they'd close Rikers by 2027. And in order to close Rikers, they have to first decarcerate, like bring down the numbers at Rikers. So what Eric Adams has done is the minute he becomes mayor, he starts campaigning against bail reform nonstop. And it doesn't matter how many times we debunk the stories after. Again, the media goes wild with the original story, just lying and tying something to bail reform that has nothing to do with it. And we debunk it and it doesn't matter. So he's been attacking bail reform like that to cause bail reform rollbacks, right? Which has caused the population of Rikers to increase, which has also caused the deaths to increase. There's been over 30 deaths since Eric Adams has become mayor at Rikers, but you're not hearing about it because Eric Adams had the Department of Corrections stop revealing to the public in custody deaths. So it's very hard to hear about it now. So what he's been doing is for every rollback and bringing down, causing the numbers at Rikers to increase, he's now using that as an argument against closing Rikers. He's saying, well, we can't close Rikers because there are too many people in Rikers, which he's causing by fighting bail reform. So again, he's the problem and the answer in his mind. That's how he's doing it.
I want to switch to some of these themes in the context of the race out in the formerly
3.
George Santos's district.
Yeah.
But before we move on from Eric Adams, why is he not in jail yet? I mean, let's say Eric Adams was your client and the FBI has come for his cell phone. The FBI, like everybody around him, all the guys he hung out with, seem to be like going in, talking to the FBI. Maybe they're getting prosecuted. They're like, what's going on? Do you have a sense of what's happening with Eric Adams there?
I think honestly, they're moving kind of swiftly, right? Like, I think Eric Adams, don't mind Eric Adams. I think that's the first thing I want to say is we should not look to Eric Adams' demeanor and how he is handling this as evidence of what's to come, because I think they're coming for Eric Adams. I think that's very clear that there's a series of events, all my political enemies in New York City, right? Before I hated Eric Adams, I was on Cuomo's neck constantly. And this was kind of how the chips started to fall for Cuomo too, right? Like, where you start hearing about the scandal with the old folks' homes. And then it started trickling down. And Cuomo was acting pretty cool and cavalier about that, as Eric Adams is. But honestly, I think several of the people involved with his campaign have pled guilty, or been charged. So I think they're just making their case against them. And I honestly think Eric Adams, I think it's the migrant crisis that caused this, to be honest. I think it was the minute not the migrant crisis because it's not real, but the minute he started directing all his hysteria with his migrant crisis towards Biden and making a negative all kind of negative attention there. It was literally the first thing happened the day he said he was going up to DC to go and go talk to Biden about the migrant crisis and demand all this. And the next thing, that's when they got his campaign, his people for funds. So I think that's it. So I'm appreciating this.
When, how far out is it that, so it would be like the Eastern District of the U.S. Attorney's Office that does the public integrity stuff, right? That's where any type of indictment, I would imagine, would come out of.
Yeah.
And do you have a sense of how many months out from the mayoral race they would put it on pause? Because they have the same rules theoretically that the Department of Justice, the FBI, when Comey came out and even talked about that letter about Hillary Clinton. We didn't get that so much with her in the special counsel, but it's close. There is a number of months in which it becomes like a no-go zone, essentially for prosecution. Do you know how many months that is out?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I think I would have to talk to other people and other attorneys that I know about what they think is going to happen, because I think maybe months ago, the sense I had gotten maybe before these charges started happening from people was that they thought it was a foregone conclusion, especially from the activists and the lawyers in New York, that Eric Adams was going to be, the mayor again, going to win another term, despite, what the internet says and popularity, because there isn't really a challenger, and they would have had to have started campaigning much before. So I'm not sure how this is gonna. It's one of those things that I think even if they get Eric Adams, I don't think it's going to work out for progressives in New York City. I don't think the leftists are going to be in a good place, because I don't think we've lined up any kind of progressive replacement, anybody that we can run and get in, right? And I think sometimes we tend to be late on these things. I think that's kind of how we ended up with Eric Adams, even with the we kind of split the vote on Maya Wiley and Diane Morales and all of that. So I don't think we're gonna come out on top from losing from whatever happens, but I think they're gonna get Eric Adams too late. But I'm not sure. I'd have to look into the specifics on how far out I think it is.
What I find interesting, I want to look at we've got some polling that came out before the actual results of the election in New York's third, and this is relevant. I guess it tightens obviously the Republicans' lead in the House, but this is really relevant about what we're going to hear about in terms of these narratives now. Yeah. The irony is that the reason why, or a lot of people think the reason why New York's third was held by a Republican until George Santos was shown the exit, and also why they lost other elections in 2022, where Democrats in every other state, short of California, had done quite well, was twofold. One was there was no impetus to activate opponents of the reversal of Roe v. Wade. In other words, people who support abortion rights. But also this Eric Adams dominated crime and immigrant narrative sort of took sway, and it essentially energized right-wing voters. And there was nobody out there energizing center to the left voters, essentially, more or less, Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. And let's listen. I want to show you this, I guess it's just a written quote of Chuck Schumer following this election. Can you pull that up, Bradley? This is Chuck Schumer. Do we have it?
Yeah, it's up here. I can read it here.
I get it too. It is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called Trump's rejection of the border legislation a gift for Democrats and said they plan to constantly over the next year remind voters that it was Republicans who torpedoed the deal. And he says the strategy has already paid dividends with Democrat Tom Suozzi, who campaigned on tougher border enforcement, winning a special election in New York this week, flipping a House seat away from Republicans. Schumer said the race in his home state of New York says something very significant, that border is no longer the province of Republicans.
Oh,
this is so gross and also just in many ways a fiction. Like this is what put up the poll. This is I think it was a Siena poll.
Aaron from Queens put this up. A good Twitter account. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if you look at this poll, addressing the influx of immigrants is the first question. And Mazi Pull-Up had a 9% advantage there over Suozzi. But Suozzi had a 9% advantage over Pull-Up in protecting our democracy. And then a 10% advantage on Congress working more effectively. A 23% advantage when it came to abortion rights, and then Israel, policy. Philip had a 3% advantage. I mean,
I think the Democrats are so strikingly out of touch. They really make it hard to do any kind of lip service for them, and I don't mean even for them just for your own benefit, because again, what the alternative is, but they make it hard because they always somehow arrive at the entirely wrong conclusion, because that shouldn't tell him that they should now use this. They've been delivered a gift because they can use this to argue, oh look, we were the ones they torpedoed the deal. With that, if anything, I think that kind of works against them, because I think what it says is, as much as Democrats are constantly willing to tap dance for the right and embrace and just lean over there and embrace whatever the right wing wants to do, the right wing has no business on doing business with them, and they just waste time and energy and don't get anything done by not actually appealing to the needs and wants of the people that are voting for them. And on their voter base, they insist on moving right to their own detriment, is what that would tell me. One.
Well, yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm gonna go. You go.
Yeah, it's just it's the fact that they're drawing conclusions from this one special election in the most specific circumstances possible. That this was George Santos's former seat. This is a district that leans right already on Long Island.
I was like, are we gonna talk about Long Island? Are we gonna talk about Long Island?
It's also it has parts of Queens, and then that part of like the North Shore of Long Island. I'm pretty sure it's close to where like Sean Hannity lives out there. James Dolan lives on the North Shore of Long Island. It might be in that district, but close. Like,
if you go too deep Long Island, they start looking at you like they look at me in Ohio. Okay,
no, I trust me. I know that area a bit, and like that is not the kind of district that says things about the general direction of where you should go for the country. It's quite the circumstances are quite specific, and the district is incredibly wealthy and specific.
And they know that, but they know people don't know that. The thing about New York City is, to the rest of the world and the country, it's just New York City. It's not no New York State, right? So they think because New York City, these boroughs, this city is so blue and progressive and diverse and yada yada, they don't forget that everything around it is not, okay?
But I mean, even with that said, if you're writing this article, if you are Chuck Schumer, if you are what you look at is, it seems to me, is two numbers. One is he had a 23% advantage on abortion. Like, that is astonishing. There is no other thing that is even close to that.
Yeah.
And this is a huge advantage. So you fight on that terrain. The other thing is that he had a 1 percentage point greater advantage for making Congress work more effectively for the American people. It doesn't matter if you have a 9% advantage in a conservative district on immigration if those same people don't believe that you can do anything. And so the idea isn't you're running on immigration, you're running on the fact that this Congress has passed half of what the last most unproductive Congress did up until for 200, for 100 years. Yeah. This is the most unproductive Congress ever. And you can run on that. And then there's also a Pew piece out there that says that Democrats' disapproval of U.S. handling of border hits the highest point of Biden's tenure. And again, this is because they don't like what he's doing from the left.
Yeah.
Like the Democrats don't like that border proposal. And so trumpeting the border, the idea that like Democrats now know how to secure the border is just, it's stupid. It's leadership and it's doing things.
You're absolutely right. But what I think it is honestly, I think the Democratic Party is bad as an immigrant. The Democratic Party is bad on immigration. They don't care about immigrants. They're not any progressive champions of immigrants. They never have been. No one is in America. Like, that's just not the case. The Republicans are worse. This I know as an immigrant. But what I'm saying is the Democrats are, because they're already bad on immigration. If they can try to convince people in their minds, and in their minds they want to win over the right rather than win over their own voter base, they insist on that. And that's a whole nother conversation for establishment Dems' deep desires for another day. But what I think it is they're already bad on immigration, and what the Republicans want is to be worse on immigration, right? That's the narrative is being painted, is that being good on immigration is to be the worst you can possibly be on immigrants. So if Democrats could convince the populace of something, that this is the kind of immigration policy we need or what we should be doing, then they would get praised for what they're already doing. They're already being bad on immigration, then they get to herald that. Versus abortion, they have to do something. There's something affirmative they now need to do. What we already established is the majority of the country has never been in support of overturning Roe. The majority of the country supports abortion rights to some degree. And so that would require them to now do something, right? In their minds, the conversation is going to be that Roe was lost under them and they now need to do something, or they failed to do something. And so they don't like that narrative. And they think they're wrong. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that that's misguided, but they think it'll be easier to convince all of us like, no, we're not weak on immigration. We do terrible things on immigration. You like that. So I think that's what's happening. But I think it's wrong. It's going to cost them huge. And I don't know how they don't know. I don't know how they're not seeing the nosedive, like Joe Biden is taking just off of Palestine and everything and thinking, let's be worse. I don't know why they're not seeing it, that the current country, this new crop of voters doesn't feel the way the boomers did. I don't know what to tell them.
It's because Morning Joe has essentially just regurgitated every knock on the Democrats you have just made is exactly what this former Republican congressman who came in during the Contract of America era with Newt Gingrich. He was part of that Newt Gingrich revolution. They listened to him. Yeah. Like literally, it's absurd. All right. We don't have too much time left here, but I want to just, you mentioned, particularly the Biden administration on Israel and Palestine, and it has been essentially almost like a gravitational force for the rest of the Democratic Party. Some of our, the Democrats and politicians that we would otherwise expect more of have been, super cautious or dancing around not to get out ahead of Joe Biden on this. And this is coming on a day where Canada and New Zealand and Australia just called for a ceasefire, which is, obviously a step in the right direction. Is a little bit late, it seems to me, but I guess, and this has become this week we had a doctor on who was at the hospital in north of Rafah, that just was attacked by Israel. We also had a caller at the beginning of the week, which I found fascinating, who was a Palestinian American who was basically wrestling with this idea of being both a progressive and a Palestinian and wanting to, somehow show his disdain for what Biden's doing, but also conscious of, as a progressive, there are a bunch of other communities that he's a part of that he knows will be hurt more if Biden is not there, and a gut-wrenching struggle. But you put out a video a while back, I guess, at the beginning of the year. I think it's entitled 2024 Voting Guide, or
Ultimate Election Survival Guide.
You articulated a perspective on voting that I think is really important for people to understand, and is really sort of like power-based, not sort of personality-based.
Yeah.
We just got a couple minutes left. Will you just sort of like give us the broad strokes on that? Because you're doing this from the perspective of someone who is an activist and actually sort of working within this system to protect people who have a marginal set of rights, and sort of meet with the government at their sort of like the crux of the government's sort of like, I guess, monopoly of power. If you will.
Yeah, I guess the short version of what I think is, I don't expect the government to create change for us or to do anything truly progressive for us. That's not who I see as doing it. And I think it's a mistake to look at the government like that. How I see it is, the government is your adversary. The people are who is trying to create change, and the government by some is the resistance, right? That's why you're trying to resist them. By some means, they're trying to maintain the status quo. And I want the weakest adversary in power. I want the people that I am best able to get something done with. And just the reality for me is, both an immigrant, but also, as more importantly, as a movement lawyer and somebody and an activist and somebody that's helping fight for different progressive policies and to get bail reforms passed and to save it and to do these different things, is it's not that I believe the Democrats are any better or morally courageous or anything like that than the Republicans. That's not what I'm saying. It's not that I'm criticizing anybody having the gripes that they have with the Democrats. It's that the people who vote for Democrats, it's the voter base, right? It's those people that you can get through to, and it's those people who get to put pressure on Democrats. I'm not saying that the Democrats in New York City pass bail reform because they care and they hold all the progressive ideals of we the left. It's because I'm able to outrage a voter base that will put stress and strain on the Democrats who they have to respond to, and that's how we're able to get bail reform. But I cannot agitate the voter base of the Republicans. There's nothing I can do. That is a brick wall. There is no way for me to advocate effectively or get anything done. We, the people, any of the change that we create, because it's us, it's progressives that are, and literally progressive activists and organizers that are writing these laws and supporting these advocacy groups and getting these things up there. You just seen the End Solitary Confinement Act out. The Unlock the Box people do a lot of work on that in California, and they just got their law that they had advocated Cory Bush to support and take to Congress. Those kinds of things don't happen when we have Republicans in office. So that is really my perspective on that. That being said, I'm not going to assail anybody for what they do, what they want to do, and how they feel and the reasons why. Voting, I don't think there's one right take on it or one right approach to it. I think it has everything to do with who you are, what you're trying to do, and what you know about, and what you stand to lose and what you stand to gain. I'm going to have a different perspective as somebody who is an immigrant, who I barely survived Trump's first term. I quite literally, I got denied for a visa. I was on unpaid leave for 7 months. Like, I was almost out of here. Like, it was literally a miracle to get the Black Caucus within my union at the time to force a sponsorship of a visa for me that I got literally right before they closed the embassies and stuff. I was out of work it was very rough for me. I'm still an immigrant, still going through USCIS. I'm at the mercy of that. So for me, I'm not even able to file my thing. Even though I've been approved for paperwork that I cannot file until the US government says my priority date becomes current. They are moving that in the last 6 months. That date has moved up 1 month. I'm not looking at being able to apply for the next 2 years. So a Trump administration quite literally would bring me to my knees. But so I have to admit that and recognize that's my own life standing. It's hard for me to advocate when people tell me, my audience, feels that outrage, and they're like, how could we ever? I'm like, how am I going to advocate for you to do something that I absolutely live a life where I know, it will prevent the work that I do, the laws that we get passed, the advocacy we do, and people like me from even staying in the country. That being said, I'm not expecting people to overlook the fact that Joe Biden has enabled the genocide. I'm not going to. But at the same time, what I want to say is that America is an imperialist nation. I didn't expect the U.S. government to do anything but support Israel, as they always have. And the reality is, I don't think we stand to gain anything, and we stand to lose a lot from what happens if, unfortunately, they have Joe Biden as a nomination and they don't seem to be interested in changing him, or that's just the reality. I don't think that means people are wrong to try to get them to try to leverage their vote and insist now that they give them something else, but I just don't see it happening. And I think what happens if we get Trump is not going to be any better for the Palestinian people, for anybody here, but I am not going to tell people, especially our Palestinian people, Muslim people, Arab people, anybody, that they can't be outraged or that they can't do what they want with their vote, or they can't say enough is enough or have a different perspective. It's just from where I stand, I know for a fact that things become harder for the people on the ground trying to do the progressive advocacy we want to see. And a lot of people that you don't realize who might have a lot to say like me, but don't actually have a say, are impacted. So that's just my personal perspective, but I don't fault anybody who's like, no way, I can't vote for Joe Biden. I'm done with the Democrats. I'm done with the lesser two evils. But to me, it's not a lesser two evils. It's the weakest adversary. I want the person I am most able to challenge and defeat. And there's nothing we can do to challenge Republicans. And I'm not sure that a Donald Trump has any interest in continuing the democratic process as we know. I don't have any faith in my mind that, based on what I saw in the first term, what I saw just on the hate crimes, the spike of we're living in a world that was brought about based on the Donald Trump. 2016 has changed this country fundamentally on what we even see as commonplace, what we see in the news, what viewpoints have become the main in the discourse, how far right we've shifted. And the reality is, if the Democrats perceive the country as shifting right, that's how they perceive the Donald Trump coming into power and the rise of this kind of right-wing nonsense. So I think Donald Trump winning is not going to shift the Democrats further left. I think it's unfortunately going to shift them further right. And I don't think the Republicans are interested in maintaining democracy or allowing for a free and fair election another time. That's just my thought process.
Olayemi Olurin, political commentator, defense attorney, proprietor of the
Illuminati,
YouTube channel and Substack. We will put a link to that at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube description. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, y'all. Bye.
Thanks.
We'll also link to that. We'll link to that video.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.